So a couple months ago, I stumbled across the Disney limited edition American Girl dolls, and my first thought was, I want that. And my second thought was, I bet I could make that. So here we are. Also, I will not be making the pictures that I saw because I made this. And I have lots of scraps left over. The last time I was at my parents' house, I grabbed my 2 American Girl dolls. This is Kirsten, and this is Alex. She's not one of the official dolls, she's one of the Girls Like You dolls. She's having some leg issues though, so I'm also gonna fix them up. I'm gonna make Kirsten into Cinderella because she's blonde, and Alex into Ariel because she has red hair. Or maybe Belle. I just want to be very clear that these dolls have been very well loved. They have been thoroughly played with and loved, so there's a lot of wear. She was my best friend growing up. I bought these 3 patterns at the secondhand craft shop, and then I realized I already had the perfect one. I started my Cinderella dress with foundation garments, but Kirsten doesn't really need a corset, so I'm jumping to the hoop skirt. I cut half a circle from cotton, stitched the bottom half of the back seam, and the bottom edge over to hold a hoop. I want to say this is where you insert hooping wire, but this is a doll dress, so I just used some plastic boning. I ran it into the channel and stitched it closed. I added a waistband and Velcro closure, and it was done! On to the petticoat! Mine took me months, but on this scale it should be much faster. I cut a full circle with the waist measurement roughly double Kirsten's and gathered it down on my machine. I stitched on an elastic waistband and hated it, so I redid it with a bias tape waistband. And look at Emmy napping on her new chaise lounge. She's so cute. I added a hook and eye for closure. For the bottom of the petticoat, I'm using leftover flounces, but these are human sized, so I trimmed them down to 2.5 inches tall. My dress has some layers with extra godets, so I made 4 mini circles to add on top. I am loving sewing on mini scale. This is awesome. My mini petticoat is ready for some ruffle attachments, and I need to figure out what order to put them in, so top I have blue, iridescent, aqua, and then purple. I didn't quite have enough of the pre-made flounces, so I can show you how I hem them, except that I ran out of the silver thread, so now I'm using gray. I used the rolled hem foot with some fishing line for extra floof. I gathered each pair of flounces together and stitched them onto the petticoat with no problems whatsoever.
Just to be completely clear on how long this ruffle actually is, let me show you how long the other one is.
Well, let's remember that this is gathered. And it is way taller than I am. It's not nearly as bad as that one, but this is also quite ridiculous. Ignoring that problem, I attached the inner flounce and... No! Oh, I'm not overreacting. I've just had so many issues when I was making the big version where I kept running out and having to make more, and it just soul-crushingly destroyed me. It's okay, Amy girl. I will survive. And then it got worse. Because I sewed all of this with no bobbin thread. I fixed all of that later, but without recording it. I made an American Girl size circle skirt pattern, but I needed to gather the waist, so I did shift the pattern down by 2 inches. I am squeezing this out of 2 tiny scraps of silk organza that I had left over from making my dress, but managed to get a whole circle.
Do not have much left over.
I sewed these into a full circle with tiny 1/4 inch French seams. Don't mind that I didn't trim the selvage off first, but now I am, and I also ironed them before stitching the seams with the right size together. And ironing again, but ironing is boring to watch. I also hemmed the skirt with my rolled hem foot before adding rhinestones. I used 3 different sizes of stones on my dress, but I am using leftover stones in the 2 smaller sizes here. I dabbed E6000 fabric fuse onto the skirt with wax paper behind it and added crystals on top. I used mostly small rhinestones at the top and the medium-sized ones at the bottom, and got the whole thing done in half an hour as opposed to the days it took me to do my skirt. I love this tiny scale. I cut the same circle out of iridescent organza and hemmed it as well. I sewed halfway up the back seam with another tiny French seam. I did a tiny double fold hem on the raw edges, and I could gather the waistlines together and add them to another double fold waistband and hook and eye closure. And ta-da! The skirt is done! Time for the bodice! I cut the pattern out of the blue bridal satin that I used for my dress, and layered on the iridescent organza and tiny scraps of the silk organza. I hope I have enough for the Bertha. I hand basted the layers together and machine sewed the pieces. I also ironed the seams off camera.
Okay, I've got my bodice, and I've got my Cinderella lining. I was working with tiny scraps, so there were only 2 viable Cinderellas, so we also have Rapunzel. And I am just going to stitch this along the neck, the armpit, the front neck, the armpit, and the back neck again, but not at the shoulders yet. I made and added some blue bridal satin piping to the bottom edge and sewed the sides and the top except for the straps. The pattern has you do it another way, but I wasn't adding sleeves. I clipped my curves before turning it halfway right side out and sticking that into the unflipped side, double checking that it wasn't twisted and then stitching across the straps. I hand stitched the bottom of the lining in and added some hooks and thread bar closures, and the base bodice is done! I drafted a tiny Bertha pattern and cut it from my largest scrap of the silk and the iridescent organza. And just like my dress, I hand stitched the edge to the top of the neckline. I folded over the bottom edge and stitched it down. I added a few tacking stitches to fluff it out how I wanted, and all that's left is the butterflies, but given the scale, I'm just going to use rhinestones. And for intermission, let me entertain you with my puppy prodigy! Here he is at 19 weeks, and also at 7 months. What talent. So Cinderella, I have a puppy. Cinderella is done and it's time to make the Ariel dress. Now I had to put away my beautiful Ariel dress a couple months ago because we got this thing and I decided to put all my floor-length dresses in storage instead of on display, which worked out very well because he has tried to chew that several times. To actually model this dress for the moment, I am going to use Kirsten again because Alex is not feeling great. This is a bit disturbing to look at. I still have to figure out how to clamp her leg properly, so Kirsten is fine though. She'll still stand. Also, someone keeps trying to eat them. And he managed to get my pajama shorts pattern yesterday. He is definitely still in his chewing phase. There is a muddy paw print. Sky, no, really? Stop eating everything. He just got another pattern. Anyway. Oh my gosh, he's not chewing on her. He's chewing on a bone on top of her. This is why he's in a crate in my sewing room normally. I got a little excited yesterday, so I cut out the pattern for the bodice. The tricky bit is going to be stitching these two pieces together because they're very curved, but this is a straight line, so that should be very simple. This is a very fun fabric. It's like almost shiny, but not quite. I carefully traced the seam allowance and started to pin only to give up and freehand it on my machine, and it worked great. I do kind of know what I'm doing by now. The back pieces went together just fine as well. I ironed my seams flat and used my hands as a clapper as they cooled. Not sure why, as there's an actual clapper right there. Time to assemble the bodice! I stitched it here and here to make this. And also a lining, and stitched it the same way I did before, except that I'm leaving the shoulders open for now. Originally, I was planning on doing the shell-shaped things in an organza overlay like mine, but I thought this was a prime time to use tons of rhinestones. The only problem was I didn't have any purple rhinestones, so 2 days later, I have a ton of purple rhinestones, so I'm gonna get bedazzling. I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you that I got Kirsten for my 8th birthday and was so excited. She was my best friend until we got a dog. And years later, I got Alex, even though I'd always wanted Felicity because she had the best clothes. I chose the features to make Alex, but I don't remember the reason why anymore. While that is drying, I started cutting the skirt. This is the top part cut in the fold, and I did a lot of math to get this lower fin section out of one piece, which ended up as 2 because I was working with scraps. This is the bottom hem, and this is a curve connecting this point to this point. But I brought in the top skirt just to double check. I think the math worked out, but it's hard to tell. Yeah, I mean it did. This is the right length. So this is going to be gathered and fit in here, and this in here. And I'll do a French seam in the front. I also cut this hip floof from the same organza. What happened here, you ask? Well, I went ice skating and didn't fall, and then got home and smashed my knee into the counter. And let's not forget how I fell while dirt biking earlier this week. Was it when I was riding all over a mountain? No, it was when I tried to park my bike. Sigh. I'm fine. With the bodice pieces all together, it's time to move on to the skirt. Again, because I already started cutting it. This is the underskirt layer of organza, cut to the same size as the outer layer. I layered them together and ran a gathering stitch here. I pinned and gathered the lower fin portion onto the skirt. I had marked the high points before gathering. After stitching, I decided it was a bit puffy, so I top stitched the seam allowance up. Don't worry, rhinestones are next! I really want to say these rhinestones are left over from my Ariel dress, but they are left over from my Ursula's Eels shoes. The pearls came from my Ariel bodice though, and I used them to cover the stitching. Plus some tiny Cinderella stones. I also added some stones and pearls to the fin part of the skirt and then left this to dry overnight. The next day, I sewed on the bodice. And then I realized the skirt was not opaque enough, so I hand-stitched on some green cotton underneath. This definitely would have been easier before I top-stitched it, but it is what it is. I stitched the bottom half of the satin skirt together, stopping at the fin seam. I stitched each fin layer independently for max floof. I did a rolled hem on each of those layers as well. I didn't record it, but I added thread bars and hooks for closure. And I'm thinking the dress looks awesome, but I think I should add more rhinestones to the bottom hem, so I'm gonna do that. And then it'll be time for a doll spa / hospital to fix Alex's leg and put her back together. I pulled all her stuffing out and tried to keep the elastic cord taut with zip ties because I had nothing else to crimp them with. Did you notice how I said tried to? Well, I started to restuff her and... things have taken a turn. This was not something I was prepared for, but the crimp broke. My plan was just to make it the right length with zip ties, but I guess that's not gonna work out now. Hope this doesn't cost me an arm and a leg. Bad joke? Oh, this is unfortunate. Just watched a quick video and I think I can fix it. They said use 1/2" elastic. Luckily, I have a sewing studio with tons of elastics, so I am good to go. I can link that very helpful video below. This reminds me of when I was a kid and Kirsten's leg fell off, and she had to go to the official American Girl doll hospital for a few weeks. Luckily I had Alex by then, so I still had a buddy. And while I had her apart, I went ahead and replaced the elastic in her other limbs as they were about to fail as well. And then I could restuff her, attach her head, and it's time to go to the doll salon! I'm not going to show you much of this because I don't know what I'm doing. But the straightener was at a low temperature. I also made some doll shoes. I hope you enjoyed this video, but before you go, I have one last surprise for you. Remember how I said I always wanted Felicity? I bought Felicity. She popped up on Facebook Marketplace right next to my dentist when I had an appointment there, so ta-da! And did you know that American Girl released patterns for some of the original dresses, so let me know which one of her dresses I should make next. And just so we're clear, I do have both of them and she's not the same doll. Bye everybody!